Well, good morning. Everybody hear me okay? Between the voice and the mic and all that? Great. Go ahead and take your seats in the back there. Get scanned in if you need to. We want to make sure everybody gets credit for the most important session of the two-day conference. All right, good morning. My name's Henry Stoever. I'm the president and CEO of AGB. Some of you may have met me yesterday morning when we were doing some work with the Gartner Institute, also with CPE. We're thrilled to be here to augment your work. When I joined AGB 3.5 years ago, one of the things that we started to do was focus more on the roles of trustees. Yes, for 101 years, we have been focused on strengthening board governance, and we said, let's take a new chapter in as we turn the century mark and focus in on individuals. Because, as you know, board service is a team sport. How many of you, by the way, have played sports ever? A lot. Okay. You know, whatever that sport might be, whether it's basketball, football, lacrosse, badminton, whatever. I haven't played badminton, I'll be honest with you. That there are different roles in different positions. And I was talking with Trustee Ramsey last night, and I said, you know what? I don't know what position he played. Well, I know he played quarterback, but if he played basketball, you know, he could be anything. But you can't have all centers, you can't have all forwards, you can't have all point guards, whatever. And you all know that. And so the role of team playership and playing on a board is really important. And so at the end of the day, about a year and a half ago we published this, last April, we published a book called The Principles of Trusteeship. It's complimentary for all board members, for all members of AGB via ebook format, and it's just a small fee to get us to print it and ship it to you wherever it might be. So I'd encourage you to do that. And everything we're going to talk about today is available, or a lot of what we're going to talk about today is on the AGB website, agb.org. So, and there's a tab on the website that says Principles of Trusteeship. So it's pretty intuitive on how to get there. So at the end of the day, I'm gonna go through, introduce two of my colleagues from AGB. I'm going to summarize the agenda of what we're going to talk about. But I'm going to share with you my view of what I believe are the 1 to 2 most important things that you're going to hear about today as being a trustee. Okay? I'm going to figure that out if it's 1 or 2, but I think it's 1. There's one, and it's actually 1, and then there's another principle that I think is really important that's actually not in our principles. So the number 1, what I believe, is thinking independently and acting collectively. You're going to hear Merrill or Kamal talk about that later today, this morning. I forget which of you has that principle. Actually, it might be me. I'm not sure. But leading by example. Okay. Think independently and act collectively. How many of you in here are from Publix institutions? Okay, so the other rest of you are private institutions. Public institutions, this is where it really comes to bear. Because you're appointed or elected by the state legislature, whatever the role might be across the country, because it varies. Your role is so important to think independently about what you believe is the most important strategies, priorities, and advocate for those strategies, priorities, initiatives. But at the end of the day, you are one voice amongst the board. And when the board votes, the board votes. And the last thing you want is for the media to be calling all the regions, the trustees, and said, how'd you vote, how'd you vote, how'd you vote? Now, it might be public, okay? But you don't want to be talking, oh, yeah, I believe this, but the board voted that way. No. You are a member of the board. Regardless of the vote, you are a member of the board. So think independently, act collectively. Now there's a middle line in between the think and the act, and that's called without undue influence. Okay, and I don't being preachy here. I'm just sharing, I'm the teacher kind of saying, hey, if there's one thing you remember this thing. Think independently, act collectively. And in the middle there is without undue influence from others. Whether that undue influence is from a donor, a politician, a colleague, a student, or whoever that other is, you are the trustee, okay? And your vote is what you believe is the most important asset for the future of the institution. All right, so there's my view, okay? Kamal and Meryl may have other views. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Kamal and Meryl. I've mentioned them like 3 times already. To my right in the purple jacket, because she's wearing her AGB purple, Meryl Schwartz. Meryl Schwartz is our Senior Vice President for Content and Program Strategy and Development. She's been with AGB quite a while, almost 26 years. It's kind of like if you have a question, she's the knowledge bank. She knows so much. And Kamal Atkins, he's a senior consultant with AGB. He's been working with AGB for about 5 years, something like that. He works with our consulting practice. He used to be an administrator at Keene State and Delaware State, and I think he still works at Delaware State, does some faculty there. So anyway, Kamal and Meryl and I are going to share the next hour with you. I would say if you have any questions along the way, please ask. Don't wait till the end, because you might forget, we might run out of time, or whatever. So that's the deal. So without any further ado, I just introduced Kamal, Meryl, and you heard from me. So Kamal's going to talk a little bit about fiduciary duties. Those fiduciary duties are really no different than, how many of you serve on a corporate board or a private company board? Okay, they're no different. They get applied in different ways. So he's going to talk a little bit about fiduciary duties, effective team sport, team playership, etc. Meryl's going to get into challenges, and then we're going to tag team around the themes and the principles, and then we'll wrap it up. All right, any questions before we get going? Any questions at all? All right, very well. What's the number one most important thing I think you should remember? Ah, he nailed it. All right, you got a gold star. Think independent. What's that? Oh yeah, in the middle, without undue influence. All right, without any further ado, come on, the floor is yours.
Good morning. I know that I'm getting ready to ask that question again. We'll make that statement again. Good morning. I know we're in the South, so I know that we understand call and response a little bit, right? Okay. Again, my name is Kamal Atkins, and I'm here to talk about your fiduciary responsibilities as members of the board. And it's your board service starts with, again, your responsibilities and your duties. And I want to mention too that it's an awesome responsibility to be a board member at a college or university. Henry talks about this quite a bit in terms of the importance of colleges and universities, not only to the students it serves, the community around it, to the region, but really to the country, in the world. You think about the roles of colleges and universities as foundational in our communities for economic development, for producing graduates who contribute to the workforce, again, the economic base, but also to our civic structure, our civic engagement, the foundation of our democracy. So your responsibilities and your duties are very, very important. One, in terms of the duty of care, we have the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, duty of obedience, and to whom those duties are owed are what we're going to cover in this section. One, the duty of care simply talks about, it simply refers to again, taking the responsibility seriously. How do you show up as an individual member of the board? So I go back to Henry's first statement about thinking independently but acting collectively. How do you as an individual board member show up as a member of your institution's board? Participating in meetings, reading the materials, engaging in the committee work. And we're going to talk about challenges a little bit later, but one of the challenges with being a member of the board is you don't meet that frequently. And so what is the work that you put in while you're there, but also the work that you put in as a board member outside of the times that you're meeting? So it means being actively involved and participating as a member of the board and ensuring that the interests of the institution take priority, long-term and the short-term viability of the institution. The duty of loyalty, again, that is placing the interests of the college or the university that you're representing, that you're serving, above all other interests at all times, ensuring that there are no conflict of interest, and if there are, you publicly identify what those conflicts of interest might be. But again, ensuring that the interests of the institution are above all else, your focus and your responsibility. That duty of obedience, as a steward of the institution and you're part of your fiduciary responsibilities, it's to ensure that the institution itself is abiding by all regulations, all laws, and your institution does not engage, or you as an individual does not engage in any unauthorized behavior or any illegal behavior from an institutional perspective. You're keepers of the mission of that institution. You ensure that the institution is fulfilling its purpose. What was your institution established to do? How was it set up to serve the students, to serve the community in which it's located? And what's the reason for the work that's taking place there? So you're keepers of the mission of the institution. We had some conversation yesterday about students entering into the institution, and the emphasis that we're placing on equitable outcomes for all students. And we're not keepers of the mission. We're not fulfilling that duty if the students come to the institution, any of those students come to the institution, take on a lot of debt, and then leave the institution without a degree that means something. That could be leaving without a degree at all, or leaving without a degree and an educational experience that's going to help them advance their personal interests as well as the interests of the community. And to whom those duties are owed? That's our students, right? Our students, putting our students first. Again, ensuring that all of our students achieve equitable outcomes and have an experience while they're on campus to serve, again, not only reach their aspirations, but also be able to serve the public good. Again, sorry.
Well, I just want to add a point to one of your pieces that you mentioned there about stewards of the mission. Can you hear me all right in the back? Okay. I've had some people ask me, hey, if the mission says X, does it mean you can't evolve? The answer is no. You don't. You don't have to stick to the initial mission. Maybe it was faith-based. Maybe it's HBU, but if the mission says we want to do this, part of the board's role is to make sure it's relevancy, okay? And if it means we need to broaden the aperture, tighten the aperture, shift the aperture a little bit, that's okay. But I just wanted to kind of foot stomp a little bit. Doesn't mean if the mission says this, established 152 years ago, that it has to stay exactly there. It can evolve.
Thank you for making that point, Henry. And an example of that, when I served as Vice President for Student Affairs at Delaware State University, I was there during the time that we were preparing for our Middle States accreditation reaffirmation visit. And as we were presenting and preparing our self-study, we started looking at the evolution of the institution over the years. Our emphasis we had one emphasis early on undergraduate education primarily, mostly with liberal arts focus and education. And we started to, over the years, advance in areas of science, technology, engineering, and math, and get more involved in research interests. And as we were completing our Middle States work, our Middle States team advised us to take a closer look at our mission, because the work that we were doing was not in line, or the mission was not in line with the work that we were doing. So during that process, we engaged the board in conversations, our board engaged in conversations, and we adjusted and rewrote our mission to better align with how we had intentionally moved as an institution, but the attention hadn't been placed on redeveloping and the mission itself. In order to be an effective board, we must work together and row in the same direction. And with regard to, and there are challenges to doing that, right? You may have some differences of opinion on the board, and that's what the committee work and the thinking independently is designed for, to have engage in conversations not only with one another as board members, but also with the leadership of the institution, particularly the president and the senior leadership, and become thought partners with them. But there certainly are some unusual challenges. One of those being that I mentioned a little bit earlier, this mix of individuals who do not meet together very often. And so there's this way that you're expected to move forward as a collective body, but you don't have very many opportunities to rehearse what the ultimate outcome is supposed to be. And again, I like the fact that Henry used the analogy of a team. A team practices quite a bit. So you don't have that opportunity to be able to practice together. So that's why that's a challenge for you. So the work that you do individually is paramount to your effectiveness as a board. You have limited experience. So many of you may not have had a lot of experience in higher education. Higher education is a very complex institution, as many of you know, with a lot of different stakeholders. And so it's imperative then that you learn more, become educated, become informed about the industry, higher education, if you will, the landscape of higher education as you engage in this work. A number of conductors, all of you are leaders in your own right. I remember going to college that I was the man, right, in athletics, so to speak. I mean, so not to toot any athletic horns, but yes. But everybody there who was recruited on the team was the man, if you will, in their respective areas. So the dynamics are very important, or woman are very important as you serve on the role, and understand again the roles and responsibilities. And from the board perspective, your responsibility for appropriate oversight, as opposed to getting involved in the operations of the institution. Power personalities and certainly priorities. We all bring our priorities and our agendas, and agendas are not necessarily a bad thing. And you advocate for those things that you feel that are important, but that's from an informed perspective and in concert with the collective will of the institution. And then no sanction and no ultimate arbitrators. You hold yourselves accountable and responsible for the work that you do. It's also in a very unusual context in terms of the challenge that you have. It's a foreign culture. The culture on institutions, whether they be public or private, are different. So there's one institute. There's no two institutions that are alike. And I've heard Henry reference Merrill, a comment that Merrill would make periodically is that when you've seen one board, you've seen one board. Right? When you've seen one institution, you've really seen one institution. There's shared governance and multiple stakeholders. They're competing and disputing performance metrics, deciding on what information you need in order to govern and how to make use of the data and the information that you have that's present for you as an institution, and what you might need to create or develop. Limited time and knowledge, episodic engagement. We talked about that a little bit. You meet however many times a year, but it's not as regular as one might like for it to be. So there's a limited time to digest information, to make sense of the information, discuss it. And so it's important that you focus on the big picture. And then full-time professionals reporting to the part-time volunteers. Those full-time professionals are the leadership of the institution, faculty and staff, and then you all are engaged with them in the work that you do. And Merrill is going to move us forward with the principles of trusteeship.
Thank you. As a nice handoff, Kamal. We've talked about the role of the fiduciary and the challenges intrinsic to board work. This is a required session for new trustees, but we think the principles of trusteeship can be helpful to all trustees at different phases of their service. In fact, when we wrote it, we thought this isn't really for new trustees. You have to know an awful lot to be aspiring to the things that are part of this, but we think that it will be helpful to all of you. How many of you are new to your role as a trustee? I know that this is, thank you. I know that this is a required session, that they've recommended this for new trustees, We think that there's a good approach to orientation of new trustees that includes an intensive look at your own institution, its assets, the signature programs, your president, the key members of the cabinet, but that's complemented by thinking about more universal principles for governance. And sometimes that's not the focus of an institutional orientation for new board members, and we think we'll help you with that today in providing that balance. We've organized the ideas, the principles of trusteeship into 3 themes: understand governance, lead by example, and think strategically. And we think of it with 3 facets to that too: your role as a fiduciary, your role as a member of a team, and your individual responsibilities. Let's dive deeper into each of these areas: understand governance, lead by example, and think strategically. I'll take the first of them and then invite Henry and Kamal to cover the next group. Embrace the full scope of your responsibilities as a board member. So most of you have probably come to this point in your career being recognized for your service to the community with a strong business background, because that's where about 70% of trustees in this country come from. And the tendency is to fall into the comfort zone, which would be the finance committee, the financial work of the board, and that is a key part of board responsibilities. But when you embrace the full scope of your responsibilities, you're also looking at academic affairs and student success, institutional autonomy, strategic planning, the work of the board itself, looking at how you govern. So when we say embrace the full scope of your responsibilities, that's what we mean. It's not just your comfort zone, but looking at all of the areas in which you're expected to lead, to govern, to be familiar. Respect the differences between the board's role and that of the administration. Colleges and universities have their own culture. The idea of shared governance is different from the administrative hierarchy in a business. Colleges and universities have an administrative structure and a hierarchy, but they also have a deference to the professional authority of faculty. I liken it to hospitals and the deference to medical professionals. If you were going in for knee surgery, you'd like someone who is an orthopedic specialist making a decision about what's going to happen, not an administrator in a back office. The same is true at colleges and universities. The board delegates authority to the president, who delegates responsibility for the curriculum to the faculty, and the faculty participate in decision making in a variety of different ways, through their own departments, through councils, through university-wide committees on which they serve as representatives. So it's a different culture for decision making, and one which it takes some time to understand. One of the things that I think challenges boards in particular is the time it takes for consultation and to be inclusive in making decisions. The third, be an ambassador for your institution and for higher education. You have an opportunity to represent your institution in everything you do. Many of you are involved in civic organizations, in churches, in the community in which you live. You can't take that hat off. People will come up to you and ask you questions. They'll want to know what's going on at your college, and you are always a representative of your institution. If you are a student or a faculty member who was elected to serve as a representative, you're not just a representative of that group, you're a representative of the whole institution. That's part of your fiduciary duty. You can help your institution as an ambassador by speaking out on behalf of the institution and for speaking out on behalf of all the institutions in Kentucky as a representative and champion of higher education. I think that there's a lot of misinformation and concern about the value of higher ed. You know it better than many people in your community and can help give voice to the return on investment for higher education. As you reflect on this, some questions that you might consider are, how do board members appropriately engage with the administration and with faculty? What are the rules of engagement at this institution? How do we do things here? Those are things that might help you in your role. What does the board do very well, and what could it do better? I'm going to turn this over to Henry for leading by example, the next group.
I'm not going to show this on the screen. I can't show this by hand. There's a lot of information here. I will totally admit that out of the gate. And when we thought about methodology, pedagogy on how to share this information with you, of course I went up front and said, okay, I'm going to tell you one thing, and I'm going to share with you what I personally believe is the most important of these 9. But when you go to our website, if you happen to buy the book, you'll find a wheel, okay? And so Meryl just went on the prior slide. How do I go backwards? Here we go. She showed these, oops, there you go. These 3 things. So in this little pie wheel, in the middle here, lead by example, understand governance, think strategically, are these 3 things, okay? Now what Kamal, Meryl, and I are doing now is we're going through the 3 around the perimeter of this wheel. So I just want to let you know that while we are showing slides, we are talking about the slides and all that, we are also giving you some visual aids to work with in the handouts, right? It's in the portal or in the app, in the app as well. You'll also see a really easy to not an easy to show chart, but it's an easy to use chart that basically says by principle, as a fiduciary, as a board member, as an individual, how do you interpret these different roles? So again, there's a lot of information here, and so I just want to hit the pause button to say there are other learning tools that we are providing you to enable you to learn about these different principles. Okay? Good. So, Meryl shared the understand governance, and so I already talked about number 5 already, but I'm going to kind of step back and say, number 4 around integrity. You all know the importance of acting, speaking, expecting integrity across your personal lives, your professional day jobs, your volunteer jobs, etc., roles as board members, trustees. Integrity is absolutely incredibly important. So in this month's issue of AGB Trusteeship magazine, I actually wrote 2 articles. One is around the future of democracy, and one is around something that our keynote speaker spoke of this morning around distinctness and identity. And I had no idea he was going to be mentioning that topic. But I think about the reason I'm mentioning identity. So you all know in your day jobs, you think about brand, and you think about what do you want the public or your customers or your prospects to think about your company? Well, the same thing holds true in higher education. The reason I'm going down this identity path is because there's 2 things that help reinforce a brand, or one thing that helps reinforce it, one thing that can erode it quickly. The build it is trust and integrity. So there's 2 things. The one that can actually, and the opposite of those 2, can destroy number 4, or your brand or your identity in a nanosecond. So it's obviously something you know a lot about. And I just wanted to highlight how integrity, as you know, reinforces your brand, your institution's brand, your board's brand, and the distinctness of your institutions for your future students and faculty and donors, etc. And it also goes back to the public-private piece, is with your governor and state legislature. So this integrity thing is incredibly important. Okay, I'm not going to go down the path of number 5 because I already beat that one a little bit too hard, but thinking independently and acting collectively with the middle ground, and I think you mentioned it, without undue influence from others. Now, I wanted to come back to that just for a second. I don't mean don't listen. So double negative. I do mean listen. So Meryl and I used to work with, or have done work with an academic in another state, and he used double negatives all the time. And first of all, it's like, oh my God, well, what are you trying to say? So you have to like pull these what do you cannot not do or whatever, something like that. But anyway, what I am saying is make sure you do listen to all of your prioritized stakeholders. So you have to listen, you have to understand. What I'm just saying here is don't do what the loudest voice says do. Do what you opine and share your views, champion your priorities with your board based on what you believe is strategically long-term most impactful for your institution. And then number 6, I want to share a quick story with you. When I was interviewing for this job 4 years ago, the selection committee asked, if you're afforded the opportunity to lead AGB, what are some of the things you may consider doing? And one of the things I shared with them is, I said, something that's really important to me is diversity and inclusion. And I believe, and I don't know anything about what AGB has done in the past, but I believe we should create an AGB diversity and inclusion initiative. And that was in early 19, so well before the summer of 20, when all kinds of mayhem erupted across the country. And so lo and behold, we actually did launch the AGB Diversity Initiative, and we expanded it to be called the JDE&I, Justice, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And we have internal work going on and external work. We believe that when we came up with our 9, and it's not like when we started this project, we said, okay, we have 9 slots. Let's figure out what are the 9 things. It was an outcome. It was a process. This whole principles of trusteeship, it was a process. And at the end of the day, we just happened to end up with 9. But anyway, we believe that the principles of trusteeship must include the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because people join organizations for a lot of different reasons. And one of those reasons is inclusion. And they want to feel like they are a part of the team. Okay? I keep using this team word a lot. I was in the Marine Corps back in the day. I played football in college for a little bit. Not a lot, just because I wasn't fast enough or strong enough. But anyway, team sports is important, and inclusion is super important. And we all know the value of different roles on different teams. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it back to Kamal.
Folks, this last area that we're going to focus on, pay some attention to, is thinking strategically. And as I look at that wheel that Henry showed a little bit earlier, this is one of the places I believe that brings the entire board together, from the thinking independently and then starting to act collectively. And these are some areas that are very important. I tend to gravitate toward these from a strategy perspective, and where I see that boards can increasingly continue to add value. And it's important it's important as a board member to, again, learn about the institution's mission. As keepers of the mission, you really have to have a good understanding, a deep understanding, and deep knowledge about the mission of the institution, the constituents, who do you serve, and who are the stakeholders in the institution, not only on campus, but also more broadly. As trustees, you're also keepers of the culture in some respects. The climate of the institution is very important in terms of being able to remove barriers to success for students in particular, and the context. Where is the institution in its history? And understanding what challenges is the institution faced with, what challenges and again barriers are students facing, and faculty and staff and the leadership of the institution in terms of fulfilling its mission. So the focus on learning about the institution, learning about the organization that you're charged with serving and leading is paramount. focus on what matters most to the long-term sustainability. That comes through that knowledge, that not only knowledge of the institution, but also knowledge of, again, the broader landscape of higher education, what's happening in the community, what's happening in the world, and focusing your efforts on those things that matter most. Again, as board members, you're not responsible for and shouldn't be engaged in necessarily the operations of the institution, but in terms of your role from a policy perspective, helps to guide what some of those what might be included in some of those operations. And again, your focus there is on the sustainability, the long-term sustainability, and as one of our colleagues, artist Hampshire Cowan would say, the long-term sustainability of the institution into perpetuity. Mostly many of your institutions have been around for more than 100 years, and oftentimes I hear presidents say, so what are we going to do for the next 100 years? What are those things that we're doing now that will ensure that the institution is around to fulfill its mission? And then with what's a hallmark for AGB is asking insightful questions and listening with an open mind. Your role is not to necessarily rubber stamp what the leadership provides you. It's to ask those questions that will help to determine what actions need to be taken in order for the institution to again fulfill its mission and its purpose for existing. So those questions should be those probing questions. They can be difficult questions, but not those questions that are aimed at a gotcha moment or anything along those lines. It's really to get understanding, to learn about what's happening with the institution, with the students. Questions like how are we addressing issues related to mental health, especially coming out of the pandemic. That's top of mind for many institutions. How are our students of color, how are our female students, how are our male students from rural areas thriving or doing in this situation? So those types of questions that can help to identify what those barriers are, what those challenges are, and how you might innovate in order to determine the path forward.
I heard your colleagues from University of Louisville talking this morning about unmet need and asking the provocative question, what's an acceptable level of debt at our institution? It's a very important question for your board to grapple with, and something that might inspire to your institutionally related foundation to prioritize the needs of your students. Henry gave you a little bit of a preview of putting all the pieces together. These principles are aspirational as well as essential. So we hope that you keep them before you as something that you aspire to, and that they're useful in guiding your actions on a regular basis. It's about how you approach your work and how you show up. Kamal talked about preparing for meetings, doing the work. Showing up is the most important thing. Coming to meetings prepared so you can use the time available to have real discussions and not just be listening to reports. That makes a difference, and that's your responsibility as an individual. So if you strive to understand governance, lead by example, and think strategically, you'll be more than halfway there. It'll enable you to be part of the team and really be a contributing member of the board. You'll be off to a good start. This is the visual aid. We did provide you with some handouts that you can take with you. This puts it all together. And when we were working with an advisory group for developing the principles of trusteeship and heard input from over 200 trustees, and we had a long, thoughtful process in coming up with this list. This wasn't just let's do this as a staff project. We really listened to our members and what the challenges are of the job and distilled it to this. We thought this image was the best for conveying the importance, because if you took away any one of these pieces, you wouldn't have the whole picture. You'd be trying to finish the puzzle. You really need to have all of these, and they're not in a hierarchy. One isn't more important than the other. You really need to understand governance. You really need to lead by example. You really need to think strategically. If you're doing only one, you won't have the whole role. So we thought that this helped to inform the importance of each one of these pieces and the 9 principles in thinking about your responsibilities. We'd like to leave some time for discussion and for your questions, and in case we needed to help get things going, we have a few. These are some things that you can think about or that you can comment on right now. I like the one in the middle. Where are your strengths and where are the areas you think you need improvement? What comes naturally to you in your role as a board member, and where do you think you might want to learn more, encourage your board to learn more, and what questions do you have for us? So I'm going to return to my colleagues and we'll handle the discussion from there.
I have a question. I guess as a board member, work at the institution, what do we do when issues are brought to us that are, I guess, people that are bringing it feel that their issues are not being addressed through normal channels, so they bring it to the board with them. How do we deal with something like that? Are we supposed to get involved, or let it be, or send them back through channels to get it resolved? I mean, what do we do as board members?
I'm going to take a stab at it first and say that's one of the things I meant when I asked what are the rules of engagement. There should be some understanding of how to direct questions that come to you. It is, as Henry said, important to listen and to bring those things back to your colleagues. But since you as an individual are not supposed to be making decisions for the institution and it is for the board, the best thing you can do is help learn from that experience and channel it to the right person. It may be the president's office. That's usually the right place to start. Say, great question. We'd love to help you with that. Didn't know that was a problem. Why don't you bring this to the president's attention? Or you could make that call on their behalf and hand it off. If it's really not your accountability to do that, try to stay in your lane, as the expression goes, and not micromanage. Sometimes people do it a little more intentionally than just, oh, we think you might be able to help. They're bringing it to the attention of a board member because you matter. You're really important people, and they're trying to raise the visibility of a problem. That can be okay as long as you help respond in an appropriate way and aren't suddenly off on a tangent or talking to the press about this problem. Keep it in perspective. Use the resources of the institution. You wanted to add to that?
I had that same situation. Faculty members may call me relative to something dealing with course overload or tenure promotion. This is something that they may have addressed. But those things that they are talking about usually are things that were addressed through the faculty senate. To go to the president, provost to the president, for the president to comment or take it forward. So what I tell them, well, what you might need to hear what you say, but what you're talking about is something that the faculty senate addressed. And you need to go back to the faculty senate and have them to look back at it if they say that you never did get a response. And so back to the faculty senate, go to the through the provost, and that's who we talk to, so the provost can take it back to the president. So the president takes it forward. And I tell them that I speak not as to lead one person's need. I speak as interest for the whole university relative to the issue, rather than just giving us background of what they want to hear.
You speak with a lot of wisdom.
Well, at my university, I've been there for 45 years, so I know some history and lots of things that I can share and help uh, the board with, because you got to know where you're coming from, to know where you're going. And sometimes when we make those changes, people come in with all new. You gotta look back at where we come from, to know where we're going.
Let me build on that point for a second. We engage with hundreds of our members every year on very specific, customized, I'm going to use the word personalized, but it's not people, I mean, it's not for a person, but it's customized for each role, or for each board. As Kamal mentioned, each board, one board is one board. One of the first times I engaged with, on a consulting engagement, happened exactly what you mentioned, sir, that there was one board member who was referencing issues that were addressed 20 years ago. Now, I was alerted in the prep calls that, hey, Henry, you may hear from this individual bring up this issue that was addressed 20 years ago. And it just happened to be this person's pet peeve, and it's like, we're looking to the future. We're looking to the long-term future. Anyway, your point is well taken, and the individual trustee shouldn't address, here's the issue. It's more of, how can we help you learn about the issue that you're bringing up? The other piece that I wanted to mention earlier about the thinking independently and without undue influence is around the media. Now, you mentioned a student or somebody on campus brings you a question. Frequently, the member of the media will be peppering each of the board members for perspective, each faculty, administrative. Lips are sealed, so to speak, and the institution should have a communication strategy that says, what's the priority order? Who speaks on behalf of the institution? And it's not, us individual trustees. Now, we might be called upon to serve as the primary spokesperson or one of them, but it's like, whatever you're called upon, mum's the word and relay get back. All right.
A good rule is the board chair speaks for the board, and that's with the consent and input from board members, the authorization to do so.
That happens a lot too.
I know, that's why I brought it up, because a lot of people answer the phone and talk. They should.
I don't have no comment. But I see.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Atkins.
So, of recent, justice, will accommodate diversity, equity, and inclusion are buzzwords found in everybody's mission statement. In every institution and every organization will tell you they're committed to that. That's not always true. What happens when a person, the VP for DEI or whomever, is charged to come in and to make sure that there is DEI across the institution? That person does not get the support he or she needs from leadership.
Do you want us to repeat the question? This is about most institutions, the comment was most institutions have a statement of commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. They may have a chief diversity officer. What happens when that person really isn't getting the support they need in order to be effective in their role? Did I get that right? I think that one of the things you can look at too is, what's the structure of the administration? Where's the chief diversity officer in that hierarchy? What's the budget that person controls? And that can reveal quite a bit about whether this is a player in the leadership team with an effective budget to lead in diversity, equity, and inclusion, or whether it's ornamental, whether the position is ornamental. I think that the commitment of the board and the chief executive mean a lot. We've talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion as a board imperative because we think your leadership matters. It's not just having the words on the page, but understanding the concepts behind it, the reasons why equity matters. I think Aaron Thompson is an amazing leader for you in this regard and has really talked about why the Commonwealth of Kentucky will be a better place if you can increase the attainment rate for the population of Kentucky and how you can advance the economy, retain employers, achieve better level of health and welfare for your population. He means it, and I hope that that is trickling down as a spirit for each board in the Commonwealth and for the institutions, not just as a nice thing to do, but as something that is an imperative for the institution. Do you want to add?
Work with, as you say, hundreds of institutions across the country. You must have seen it.
So let me give you a couple of points. And all right. So a year and a half ago, I mentioned last April, we published this thing called the Principles of Trusteeship. I call it the Purple Book because it is purple. It's like Merrill's jacket. They're purple. The Purple Book. Either the week before or the week after, I can't remember which one. We also issued or published the AGB Board of Directors statement on justice, equity, and inclusion, and guidance for implementation. That was a year-long effort to pull that together. And there were 3 key strategies in there. And those 3 key strategies are develop and deploy an equity lens, develop and deploy an equity strategy through the board lens. The next one is develop and employ an equity strategy through the community or through the campus. And the third one is develop and deploy an equity strategy through the community. So it's the same kind of words, but board, campus, community. So we did that. And when we did that, we did get some blowback from some of our members. And I'm trying to go back to your initial question about how do you handle adversity to lack of support. So one of the first times I got called to help talk about this was about a year ago from a state that has a system, and they said, we'd love you to have somebody come in and talk about your new diversity, your board statement. And I said, great, I'll go get somebody. And they said, no, we want you, Henry. And I'm going to get to my point in a second, but I'm telling you the story on how we got there. And I said, well, why do you want me to? I'm not an expert. I'm not the subject matter expert. Yes, I am super passionate about the topic, but I am not the subject matter expert. And they said, because you're the white guy. And we need you to come in and talk about this topic because you're the white guy and coming in. So where I'm going with this is knowing your audience. Okay? And so what I have done, so then another engagement with another state had a system. They said, Henry, we want you to talk about the same thing, but we would ask you not to use the E word before student success. The E word is equitable. Okay? Now that's the title of our book. But where I'm going to you, the reason I'm mentioning these 2 different scenarios is knowing your audience. And sometimes words matter. Words matter, clearly. And at the end of the day, what I personally, this is a Henry story, I'm going to fall on my sword around student success for all students. And so knowing my audience, I might use the phrase student success for all students. And I define what all students means. And you can imagine all students, race, gender, ethnicity, income, geography, first time, all kinds of different ways. Because what I found is that everybody is interested, literally everybody is interested in supporting student success for all students. But not everybody is supportive of equitable student success, even though they're the same things. So my point on sharing this was just two stories of how I was called in for different engagements knowing the audience, and sometimes when you hit resistance for support, whether it's the chief diversity officer or a different whatever, it's because of the words and the outcomes. So I just share those two things. Are the words what's creating a challenge, or are the outcomes also what's creating the challenge? Because sometimes the words and the outcomes are not aligned with the audience's expectations, and that's what's important for the leadership, to align the words and the outcomes. And sometimes you got to strip away a word to get to the outcome. And to me, the outcome of student success for all students, to me, is more important than everybody in the world agreeing to use the word equity. Okay? That's my problem. Sorry about that.
No problem. The thing that I would add, you're exactly right, that oftentimes, especially since 2020 and the murder of George Floyd, you're starting to see a proliferation of statements about an institution's commitment to equity, justice, and inclusion, as well as these proliferation of chief diversity officer or chief diversity officer type positions as part of a demonstration of the commitment. However, what you rightly identified though too is that oftentimes it's that one person's responsibility as opposed to the collective, the institutional responsibility from the board all the way down, leadership at every level. And so one of my responses would be, why is that person feeling that he or she is not getting supported? Is it resources? Is it the inability to change ideas, perceptions, mindsets? And if it's stated that it's a priority for the board and for the institution, are the actions consistent with the statement? And if the actions are not consistent with the statement, why are they not? And the board is responsible for, and we go back to the principles, trusteeship, champion justice, diversity, justice, equity, and inclusion. That's a conversation at the board level as well. And that's part of the project that we're working on with the Gardner Institute, Kentucky, and being supported by Ascendium, is that a lot of different things have been tried. Chief diversity officer positions, coordinator positions, you have multicultural centers on campuses. All those things have been tried, but we're still wrestling with the same issue, with equitable outcomes for students, the structural and systemic issues. And what we haven't tried, though, is more of an emphasis and focus at the board level and those conversations, and then drilling down into some of those metrics, disaggregating the data that will help inform what's happening on the campus and where your role in terms of policies, infrastructures, decisions about resource allocation come into play. If the research that you do and the data that you're examining suggests where those issues might be. Is it mindset? Is it the decisions about resource allocation? Does it need to be moved up on the list of priorities, and not in one space, but across the operation of the institution and at every level?
Is the agenda of the board and the strategic priorities of the institution aligned with those goals? Those are two other places where you can look for evidence of that commitment, and the conversation in the boardroom can help move that.
Mistaken. One thing I add to that too is that while you're identifying those things and they're being brought to your attention, prospective students and your current students are looking at those things as well. So they're scrutinizing the statements that the institutions are making and the commitment they see on the campus level with faculty, staff, and students as to whether or not the institution is living out those statements, and scrutinize that even more than I've ever seen in my 25 plus years in higher education.
That's a really deep question.
So the video isn't lining up with the audio. And from top to bottom, boards on down, we're not modeling what we mandate.
So for those on the,
You're calling out the behaviors, and I think that's a role that you can play as a trustee.
Yeah, so for those on the virtual connectivity, the statement was, so the audio isn't aligned with the video, and the levels across the institution may not be aligned as well, which are both accurate.
It's not modeling what we mandate.
Correct. Yep, no doubt.
And when we look at our institutions, we will find many, if not most of them, are doing well with diversity at the student level. And even when we get into custodial, culinary, we do very well. But when we get to professional and executive, we're not doing well at all.
And those are metrics that you can monitor.
We've got the data. We don't need another study.
Yeah.
We have the data.
And you can set goals about. I think it's really important to disaggregate. What are the promotion and tenure decisions
We've got all the data.
disaggregated by?
It's all there.